Eliot Grayson had never intended to become a husband, let alone a husband to a princess from another star system. Yet here he was, plummeting through the anti-gravity corridors of Lyrathia's palace, arms flailing like a marionette whose strings had gone rogue. The concierge droid, a hovering sphere with a monocle lens that whirred indignantly, attempted to stabilize him with a polite, "Excuse me, sir, I suggest more coordination," only to accidentally zap the floor panels, sending a stream of glittering liquid levitating in midair. Eliot landed in it with a splat that made him feel like a soggy hologram projection of himself, and he muttered something about cosmic irony while scraping luminous puddle off his trousers. From across the corridor she watched. Princess Selara stood with the poise of someone who had been carved from starlight itself. Her eyes shimmered like distant nebulae, sharp yet warm, and her ears, long, tapered, twitching with every subtle movement, betrayed her amusement. She raised an eyebrow, a gesture that seemed entirely natural yet entirely alien. "You may want to reconsider the dramatic entrances, Eliot," she said, her voice melodic but carrying an undercurrent of playful reprimand. Eliot's ears, which were perfectly ordinary, flopped nervously as he attempted a bow that nearly toppled him over again. "You flatter me," he said, though he knew she could see right through it. "Or perhaps the palace gravity is conspiring against me." He gestured vaguely to the floating shards of decorative light that spun around them like tiny orbiting moons, most of which had been slightly dislodged by his earlier collision. Selara's lips twitched in what might have been a smile or a suppressed laugh, and Eliot nearly choked on his own relief. He had been briefed, briefly, on the intricacies of Lithari court protocol. The delicate alignment of gestures during greetings, the precise tilt of the head when acknowledging a superior, and the importance of never, ever confusing a ceremonial hoverdove with a snack drone. Eliot had memorized the rules, of course, but memorization was one thing, execution was another entirely. Every step was a potential interstellar faux pas, every glance could provoke an international incident, and yet, somehow, the absurdity of the situation made him grin. Selara moved toward him, her long ears flicking as she floated above the ground, skirts brushing the reflective floors without a sound. "We'll begin your husbandly duties tomorrow," she said. "Today, you survive the palace. That will be enough." Eliot raised a hand in mock salute, slipping slightly on a stray spark of anti-gravity dust. "Understood, Your Highness. I shall endeavor not to embarrass myself beyond the already catastrophic baseline." They passed through the atrium, where gardens floated in mid-air, bioluminescent flowers drifting like slow meteors. The palace's automated fountains occasionally shot streams of liquid starlight, and Eliot narrowly avoided one, only to step into another with a comic splash that sent a nearby, hovering teacup spinning into orbit. Selara's eyes followed the trajectory with a mixture of amusement and what Eliot swore was a glimmer of approval. "You handled disaster creatively," she observed. Eliot bowed, a little too deeply, nearly toppling a decorative statue that blinked in protest. By the time they reached the guest quarters, Eliot was drenched, glittered, and oddly exhilarated. He had expected cold formality, stiff etiquette, and a sense of alien detachment. But Selara's presence, with the flick of her ears and subtle smiles, made even the chaos feel like part of an intricate dance he might actually survive. Perhaps, he thought, if he played his cards right, or at least tripped gracefully enough, he might not completely ruin this pretense. And yet, beneath the humor and fluster, a strange curiosity bubbled. What sort of woman insisted on precision in everything yet could laugh at cosmic disasters with such ease? One thing was certain. This was going to be no ordinary mission, and she was no ordinary princess. Eliot sighed, collapsing onto the bed that adjusted its firmness to his body automatically. The soft hum of the room's gravity stabilizers and the faint glow of floating data panels seemed soothing, almost conspiratorial. Tomorrow, he would step into the role of husband, rehearsed lines and all. Tonight, he allowed himself a small, guilty thrill at the absurdity of it all. Between cosmic mishaps, glittery puddles, and a princess whose long ears betrayed every secret thought, Eliot realized that surviving Lyrathia might be harder than he expected, but at least it would be entertaining. And perhaps, he thought with a wry smile, if he could keep his dignity intact for more than 5 minutes, Selara might even believe him. Eliot woke to the gentle hum of the palace's gravity regulators, which purred like a contented alien feline as sunlight refracted through crystalline panels, scattering prismatic colors across the room. He sat up cautiously, mindful of the bed's adaptive adjustments that had a tendency to overcompensate if one moved too quickly, sometimes flinging its occupant into the air with a soft, apologetic whoosh. He narrowly avoided such an incident, blinking at a holographic alarm clock that hovered above his head, projecting the time in 3 different galactic standards. Somewhere between panic and amusement, he realized that surviving a single day here required more finesse than any diplomat training manual could provide. Breakfast was a delicate affair. Selara greeted him in the dining chamber, ears twitching in amusement as Eliot approached the floating table, which rotated slowly to simulate a gentle orbital motion. Plates hovered inches above the surface, emitting soft glows that indicated their temperature and nutritional content. Eliot reached for a slice of starfruit, only to have it dodge his grasp like a playful sprite. "The fruit is alive?" he asked, trying to sound witty, but Selara's eyebrow raised, signaling that he had, predictably, missed the point entirely. "You might want to focus on not crushing it with your fingers," she said, her voice light, yet the tilt of her head betrayed genuine curiosity. Her long ears flicked in a rhythm he couldn't quite decipher, adding an almost musical accompaniment to her words. Eliot made a show of bowing to the fruit, pretending reverence, and Selara laughed, a soft, airy sound that made the corridors seem warmer, less imposing. The morning continued with lessons in alien etiquette. Selara insisted that Eliot learn the precise manner of addressing council members, the subtle tilts and micro-gestures necessary to convey respect without appearing subservient, and the intricate art of holographic dance, which involved floating across the room in controlled arcs while avoiding ornamental drones. Eliot found himself entangled with a holographic ribbon, spinning helplessly until Selara caught him by the wrist, her grip firm but gentle. His own hand brushed against hers, and for a fleeting moment the world seemed to slow. He coughed awkwardly, muttering something about physics and personal space, while she simply smiled, her ears twitching with amusement. Between lessons, Eliot observed Selara in quieter moments. She moved with a grace that seemed almost to bend the palace's artificial gravity in harmony with her steps. Her long ears flicked at the slightest sound, betraying subtle shifts in her mood, while her eyes, reflecting distant galaxies, seemed to see right through him. Despite the pretense he was meant to maintain, he found himself drawn to these small details, to the way she laughed when a hovering teapot spilled a tiny arc of steaming liquid, or the way she corrected a ceremonial droid's pronunciation with a wry glance. Humor softened the weight of court life, and in those moments, Eliot's role felt less like deception and more like an opportunity to discover something profoundly unexpected. By mid-afternoon, they practiced what Selara called the greeting choreography, a precise sequence of bows, nods, and gentle hand gestures that could be performed in zero gravity without offending interstellar dignitaries. Eliot's clumsy attempts caused a minor cascade of floating goblets, which spun like tiny planets before he managed to catch them with a flourish that earned Selara's quiet applause. "You're improving," she said, her tone teasing, yet not unkind. Eliot bowed theatrically, only to have his foot catch on a loose anti-gravity panel, sending him into a somersault that ended with him tangled in a curtain of holographic starlight. The evening brought lessons in conversational diplomacy, and here Eliot found his humor most useful. He deflected awkward questions with jokes that drew reluctant chuckles from Selara, and, surprisingly, from the palace aides observing the session via hovering monitors. For the first time, Eliot felt a fragile bridge forming between pretense and connection. Selara's ears flicked at each of his jabs, her laughter a subtle rhythm that punctuated the otherwise formal atmosphere. By the time the twin moons of Lyrathia rose, casting a silver glow across the palace, Eliot realized that the princess was not only teaching him how to navigate alien etiquette, but was, unwittingly, teaching him patience, observation, and the unexpected joy of shared laughter. As he retired to his quarters, Eliot allowed himself a quiet thought. Surviving Lyrathia might require more than just acting skill. It might require heart. And somehow, in the midst of floating fruit, dancing holograms, and a princess whose long ears twitched at every joke, Eliot suspected that this heart might be growing in ways he could never have anticipated. The morning of the royal gala arrived with a flourish of hovering banners, each displaying the sigils of alien houses in iridescent colors that shifted depending on the observer's angle. Eliot stared at his reflection in a levitating mirror, adjusting the ceremonial suit that seemed to have a mind of its own, tightening and loosening its fit in a mildly judgmental rhythm. The suit's nanofiber threads were supposed to react to posture and mood, but they only seemed to mock his nervousness, constricting around his shoulders just as he exhaled. "Why do I feel like a Christmas decoration strapped to a jetpack?" he muttered under his breath. Selara, gliding into the room with the elegance of a star caught in a gentle orbit, tilted her head, ears flicking with amusement. "You're punctual," she said. "I'll give you that. The suit, perhaps less so." Her voice carried a teasing lilt that Eliot suspected could have unnerved even the most confident diplomats. He grinned, attempting to bow gracefully, only to have the suit interpret it as a signal for full aeration, lifting him slightly off the ground and nearly sending him into the ornamental chandelier. Selara caught his elbow with a deftness that made him wonder if she had superhuman reflexes, and he landed on his feet, bowing again, this time with more dignity, or at least as much dignity as one could manage when hovering slightly. The gala hall itself was a marvel of interstellar engineering. Floating platforms rotated slowly above the crowd, each carrying holographic projections of constellations from various star systems. The guests, a mix of species with forms ranging from humanoid to tentacled elegance, regarded the newlyweds with curiosity, subtle suspicion, or outright amusement. Eliot's job was to smile, nod, and occasionally perform the ceremonial hand-hold of unity, a gesture that involved balancing on a rotating platform while gently entwining hands with Selara. He immediately tripped, causing a minor ripple through the platform, which shifted and sent a floating tray of crystal goblets spinning into orbit. Eliot extended his arms in an improvised dance move that somehow caught 3 of the goblets before they hit anyone, eliciting a quiet round of applause and an appreciative twitch of Selara's long ears. As they made their rounds, Eliot tried to engage dignitaries with practiced charm. One diplomat, a 6-limbed creature with luminescent skin, leaned close and asked in a whisper about Eliot's compatibility rating with Lyrathia physiology. Eliot panicked briefly, imagining interspecies mishaps, then improvised. "Perfectly compatible as long as I don't try to hug you the way I hug humans. That's complicated." Selara stifled a laugh, her ears flicking like twin metronomes, while the alien diplomat emitted a surprised trill that Eliot assumed was amusement. He breathed a silent sigh of relief and made a mental note never to research interspecies etiquette in public again. Halfway through the gala, a rogue protocol droid, apparently malfunctioning due to a spilled drink, attempted to enforce an outdated ceremonial law, which involved presenting Eliot with a bouquet of self-replicating flowers. Each bloom immediately began duplicating, quickly forming a small, tangled forest of flora hovering mid-air. Eliot attempted to corral the runaway bouquet with panicked gestures, earning wide-eyed stares from the audience. Selara, ever composed, placed a hand lightly on his shoulder, guiding him through the chaos with a calmness that made him question whether he had been exaggerating her abilities in private. Her long ears twitched with every movement, as if choreographing their interaction silently. By the time the gala drew to a close, Eliot was exhausted, glittering with the residue of self-replicating petals, but strangely exhilarated. Between near calamities, awkward bows, and improvised humor, he had survived the gauntlet of alien nobility and emerged relatively unscathed, earning Selara's quiet, approving smile. As they floated toward the palace gardens afterward, Eliot realized that the shared laughter, the unexpected trust, and the subtle touches had shifted something imperceptibly but undeniably. Somewhere in the midst of spinning goblets, self-duplicating flowers, and alien scrutiny, Eliot found himself laughing genuinely, and for the first time, he considered the possibility that this charade might be leading to something far more real than he had ever expected. The palace was quiet that night. The usual hum of floating corridors softened to a gentle vibration that felt almost like a lullaby. Eliot wandered onto the observation deck, drawn by the soft glow of Lyrathia's twin moons reflecting on the city of hovering towers below. Selara was already there, perched on a levitating bench, her long ears catching the moonlight, tips glowing faintly. She looked up as he approached, and for a moment the playful teasing of the day faded into something quieter, something that made Eliot's chest tighten with unaccustomed awareness. "I hope you didn't come here just to trip over gravity panels again," she said, though the slight curve of her lips suggested she was already enjoying the thought. Eliot held up his hands defensively, nearly catching a passing holographic butterfly with the other. "I'm trying very hard to be dignified. Gravity is the true enemy tonight." Selara's ears twitched in amusement, and Eliot, emboldened by the sound of her laughter, sat down beside her on the hovering bench, which adjusted effortlessly to both of their weights. The city stretched out beneath them, a lattice of gleaming spires, levitating gardens, and slow-moving skycraft. Eliot let out a long breath. "I didn't expect it to be this beautiful. I mean, I expected a palace, of course, and flying flowers and glittering corridors, but not this." Selara tilted her head, ears flicking as she regarded him thoughtfully. "You see only what you allow yourself to see," she said, a gentle rebuke wrapped in amusement. "Most of my court never even glance at the city. They're too focused on etiquette, gossip, or imagining what scandal they might manufacture next." Eliot chuckled, leaning back to let the motion of the bench lift him slightly. "I suppose surviving the court and navigating gravity-controlled furniture leaves little room for sightseeing." His tone was teasing, but he felt the sincerity beneath it. Selara's gaze softened, her ears tracing subtle patterns in the air as if they were writing invisible music between them. "Perhaps you see more than most," she said. Eliot blinked, caught off guard, and looked down at his hands, trying to hide his blush. They spoke quietly then, sharing stories of their pasts. Selara spoke of her childhood under twin suns, of floating gardens where gravity was taught as an art, of the pressure of being a princess with eyes and ears from 1,000 worlds on her decisions. Eliot shared tales of Earth, of cramped apartments, clumsy traffic, and mistakes that seemed inconsequential until placed beside the vastness of space. He punctuated each anecdote with humor, drawing soft laughter from Selara, her ears twitching like delicate pendulums in rhythm with her amusement. Each laugh made Eliot feel the distance between pretense and reality shrinking ever so slightly. At one point, a small service drone whirred past, dropping a tray of starlight-infused tea. Eliot nearly flinched, but Selara caught the tray effortlessly with a hand that seemed both graceful and powerful. "Tea," she said simply, "is not just a drink. It's an exercise in focus, patience, and diplomacy." Eliot raised an eyebrow, "And I take it spilling it is considered an interstellar crime." Selara's ears flicked sharply, and she allowed herself a quiet chuckle. "Mostly, but I think you would survive the sentence, barely." Hours passed, and the conversation drifted into dreams, hopes, and fears. Eliot found himself speaking in a way he had never allowed in his life before, and Selara listened, not as a ruler to a subject, nor a princess to a pawn, but as someone truly curious. The moonlight bathed them in silver, the city below glittering like a scattered constellation. At one point her hand brushed his, subtle yet deliberate, and Eliot froze, aware of the electricity of contact amplified in zero gravity. Her long ears twitched with anticipation or amusement or something in between. Finally, Selara turned to him, gaze steady. "You are not like the others," she said softly. "I find myself wondering if all your clumsy humor hides something real." Eliot swallowed, smiling awkwardly. "I'm not sure even I know yet, but I think I'm starting to like the view from here, especially with company." Her laughter, soft and melodic, wrapped around him as they watched the moons trace their paths across the sky, a delicate rhythm of trust and quiet connection beginning to form between them, unhurried, unexpected, and entirely genuine. The morning began with a minor explosion in the kitchens, harmless, technically, but alarming enough to set off a chain of alarms, and several hovering fire-retardant drones that buzzed through the palace like oversized metallic bees. Eliot ducked under a floating chandelier, narrowly avoiding being bonked on the head, and muttered to himself about whether surviving the royal gala had been easier than surviving breakfast here. Selara appeared at the doorway, ears flicking in amusement, watching him scramble. "You do realize this is why palace staff keep emergency protocols on speed dial," she said, raising an eyebrow. Eliot paused, holding up a half-charred pastry as if it could vouch for his survival skills. "I call it interactive culinary defense." It was in that chaotic moment that news arrived. A faction of disgruntled nobles had decided to test the veracity of Eliot's supposed marriage. Their first tactic was subtle, a robotic cat designed for friendly reconnaissance that had been programmed to leap onto laps and purr soothingly. Only this particular cat seemed determined to knock over anyone it touched, including Eliot, who ended up chasing it across the levitating halls, arms flailing as though gravity itself had betrayed him. Selara followed, quietly floating behind, her ears twitching in perfect rhythm with the antics. "You make it look so elegant," she said dryly. Eliot paused, glaring at her. "Elegant is not the word I'd use for being attacked by a mechanical feline missile." She laughed, a soft chime that echoed against the crystalline walls, and the tension melted for a moment. By mid-afternoon, things escalated. A holographic clone, meant to impersonate Eliot and spread scandal, malfunctioned horribly, tripping over itself and projecting embarrassing dance routines for the entire staff. Eliot tried to intervene, only to slip on a stray puddle of luminescent coolant, sending the clone spinning into a stack of hovering platters. Selara, ever composed, caught him by the wrist just before he collided with a decorative wall. "Your improvisation is inspiring," she remarked, the twitch of her long ears betraying barely contained amusement. Eliot, catching his breath, replied, "I call it strategic chaos." "You're welcome." Despite the comedic disasters, the noble faction had more serious motives. Rumors of espionage, secret alliances, and interstellar gossip filled the palace channels, but Eliot and Selara navigated each with a mix of wit, timing, and occasional mild panic. They discovered secret corridors lined with shifting holographic maps, dined with emissaries who spoke entirely in alternating color-coded light flashes, and evaded surveillance drones that seemed to delight in tripping anyone who appeared too competent. Each challenge became a game, and Eliot realized that laughter was perhaps their most powerful weapon. By evening, the rogue nobles had grown frustrated. Their final ploy involved sending a levitating cake designed to accidentally land on Eliot's head during a formal council meeting. Selara, anticipating the maneuver, subtly redirected the cake with a flick of her hand, while Eliot executed an impromptu somersault that made the incident look deliberate. The nobles' plan backfired spectacularly, leaving them red-faced while Eliot received discreet applause from palace aides and a quiet chuckle from Selara, whose long ears twitched in satisfaction. As they retired to the observation deck later that night, both exhilarated and exhausted, Eliot felt a strange sense of partnership forming. The chaos of the day, the laughter, the narrowly avoided disasters, all had forced them to rely on each other in ways neither had expected. Selara's hand brushed against his, this time deliberate, and Eliot felt a quiet thrill. "I think we make a good team," he said, smiling awkwardly, "even if we almost die doing it." She laughed softly, her eyes reflecting the floating city lights. "You survive in ways I never imagined, Eliot, and somehow you make it fun." For the first time, Eliot realized that the palace was no longer just a place of duty or deception. It had become a landscape for discovery, trust, and something that might, very quietly, be the beginnings of affection. Between rogue robots, exploding kitchens, and levitating desserts, a fragile bond was forming, strengthened by humor, chaos, and the unspoken knowledge that together they could survive anything, even the absurdities of interstellar politics. Eliot woke to the soft hum of the palace's gravity stabilizers, which seemed unusually cheerful that morning, as if mocking his growing awareness of his own heart. Across the hall, Selara floated gracefully in meditation, ears twitching in rhythm with the faint pulses of the twin suns outside the window. Eliot rubbed his eyes and whispered, "How can someone look like they belong to a symphony while I can barely keep my socks from floating off?" Selara's ears flicked, and she opened one eye just enough to shoot him a look that was half amusement, half exasperation. The day began with a series of mundane but comically tricky lessons. Selara insisted Eliot master the art of ceremonial hand gestures that could influence a council's mood, subtle tilts, finger dances, and eyebrow signals that could calm an entire delegation or ignite a minor scandal. Eliot tried to keep pace, flailing at one point and accidentally directing a polite bow toward a hovering holographic portrait of her ancestors. The portrait blinked disapprovingly, and Eliot muttered, "I swear I meant well," as Selara's laughter filled the hall, ears twitching like twin tuning forks in perfect harmony with the sound. They moved to the gardens, where floating flora required delicate manipulation. Eliot attempted to prune a gravity-lifted bloom and instead sent a cascade of petals spinning into orbit. Selara caught them midair, turning the disaster into a graceful arc of color that seemed choreographed. "You create beauty by accident," she observed, her voice teasing yet approving. Eliot grinned, embarrassed but secretly pleased. "I call it abstract horticulture," he said. She tilted her head, long ears brushing a passing wisp of moonlight. "You have a talent for unexpected solutions," she said softly, her eyes lingering on him longer than etiquette required. By afternoon, Eliot's awareness of Selara had shifted in subtle but undeniable ways. He noticed the tiny quivers of her ears when she laughed, the faint tilt of her head when she considered his words, and the warmth in her gaze that made even the most absurd lessons feel intimate. They sat together on a floating platform overlooking the city, sipping tea that shimmered with starlight-infused vapor. Eliot cracked a joke about gravity laws being written by someone with a cruel sense of humor. Selara laughed, a melodic sound that lingered in the platform's subtle oscillations, and Eliot felt a small thrill as her hand brushed his accidentally, or perhaps deliberately. Later, a minor diplomatic challenge arose. A group of visiting dignitaries attempted to test Eliot's knowledge of alien protocol by presenting a riddle that involved translating the subtle twitch of Selara's ears into a treaty clause. Eliot panicked, imagining a catastrophic faux pas, but Selara whispered hints with a playful glint, her long ears flicking in rhythm with the clues. Eliot's improvised solution not only satisfied the delegation, but caused a ripple of delighted amusement through the observers. They both laughed, Eliot holding back tears of relief while Selara's eyes sparkled with genuine pride. As evening fell, the palace shimmered under twin moons and the floating gardens glowed softly. Eliot and Selara found themselves alone, perched on a balcony that overlooked the city's slow-moving skycraft. The quiet was punctuated only by the faint hum of hovering drones and the occasional twinkle of bioluminescent petals drifting past. Selara's gaze met his, earnest and unguarded. "You are different," she said, voice low and sincere. "I no longer wonder if your affection is pretend." Eliot swallowed, feeling his chest tighten with emotions he had long avoided. I think I might actually like being here," he admitted, fumbling for words. "And I think I might actually like you." Her hand reached for his, deliberate and steady. Her long ears brushed against his shoulder as she said softly, "Then perhaps it is time for pretense to end. Be my real companion, Eliot." The words hung in the moonlight, delicate yet profound, a turning point neither of them had expected. Eliot's heart raced, part fear, part exhilaration, but mostly wonder at the unexpected trajectory of their bond. For the first time, the palace, with its floating flowers, gravity tricks, and interstellar politics, felt like a place where something genuinely real could begin. A union that was no longer scripted, no longer an act, but entirely their own. The palace was alive that morning with a quiet energy, the kind that comes just before a major ceremonial event. Eliot moved through the corridors with more confidence than he had felt on his first day, suit perfectly aligned, gravity stabilizers behaving, and an uncharacteristic sense of calm. Selara was already waiting in the central atrium, her long ears brushing lightly against the air, catching stray motes of floating starlight. Her eyes met his, and he caught the same mischievous sparkle he had noticed from the start, tempered now with warmth and something deeper, something genuine. Their first task was to host a visiting delegation from a neighboring system, a group of dignitaries with reputations for being impossible to please. Eliot, who once would have quaked at the thought of mispronouncing a ceremonial greeting, now approached them with relaxed humor. He cracked a few carefully chosen jokes about gravity mishaps and floating fruit, eliciting laughter that loosened the icy decorum of the room. Selara's ears twitched with approval, and she leaned lightly on his shoulder at one point, a subtle but unmistakable sign of trust and camaraderie. The duo moved seamlessly through the protocols, a perfect blend of alien grace and human improvisation, earning nods from the observers and quiet applause from the palace staff. The rogue nobles who had plotted against Eliot earlier had apparently decided to test one last gambit, but the attempt was laughably ineffective. A rogue security drone, supposedly equipped to expose any deceit, malfunctioned mid-flight, entangling itself in the decorative banners and spinning helplessly. Eliot caught it with a casual flick of his hand, joking about the drone's sense of timing, while Selara laughed, ears twitching like twin metronomes. The nobles, red-faced, were quietly escorted out by palace security, their plans foiled more by miscommunication and comedic mishaps than by overt confrontation. Later, Eliot and Selara walked through the palace gardens, where floating orchids and luminescent vines glimmered softly in the light of the twin moons. Eliot reflected on how much had changed. He had arrived expecting a simple ruse, a temporary role in a dangerous game of politics. Instead, he had found companionship, trust, and something that defied expectation. Love that emerged slowly, punctuated by laughter, danger, and shared discovery. Selara, too, had shifted, allowing vulnerability to show beneath her royal poise, teaching him patience and grace in ways neither had anticipated. They reached the observation deck, overlooking the city's hovering towers and streaming skycraft. Eliot reached for Selara's hand, and she responded with a firm, confident grip. "We've survived palace chaos, interstellar politics, and self-replicating pastries," he said with a grin. "I think we can handle anything now." Selara laughed, her ears flicking rhythmically, and replied, "I believe you're right." And it seems the galaxy agrees. Above them, drones performed a synchronized display of lights, tracing patterns across the sky as if celebrating the union that had grown from pretense to something real. In the quiet after the display, Eliot felt a profound sense of completion. He was no longer the uncertain, bumbling man who had first arrived, fearful of every misstep. He had learned resilience, humor, and the subtle art of reading an alien heart. Selara